first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of my cramped apartment, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor. I stretched my tired limbs and winced at the soreness in my feet. A souvenir from last night's double shift at Bella Notte, the upscale Italian restaurant where I'd been working for the past 8 months. The faint aroma of garlic and tomato sauce still clung to my hair, despite the shower I'd taken before collapsing into bed. "Sei già sveglia, Sofia?" my grandmother's gentle voice called from the kitchen, the familiar Italian flowing between us as naturally as breathing. "Hai dormito bene? Sì, nonna," I replied, though it wasn't entirely true. My sleep had been fitful, haunted by worries about our mounting bills and my grandmother's deteriorating health. Her medication alone consumed nearly half of my monthly income. "I'll be right there." I quickly slipped into my uniform, a crisp white button-down shirt and black slacks, and pinned my name tag that read simply, Sophia. The mirror reflected a pale face with dark circles under hazel eyes, framed by unruly chestnut hair I hastily pulled back into a neat bun. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would turn heads or command attention. Just ordinary Sophia Russo, invisible to most of the world except when holding a notepad and reciting the day's specials. Nonna was waiting with a small espresso and a slice of homemade focaccia, her arthritic hands trembling slightly as she pushed the plate toward me. "Mangia, piccola mia, you need your strength." "Grazie, nonna." I kissed her weathered cheek, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and rosemary that always surrounded her. "I might be late tonight. Mr. Gallo mentioned a private event in the back room." Her eyes clouded with worry. "Be careful, Sophia. I don't like these late nights." I forced a reassuring smile. "It's just rich people eating overpriced pasta, nonna. Nothing to worry about. If only I had known how wrong I was." Bella Notte was unusually quiet when I arrived, the normal bustle of the kitchen staff replaced by a tense hush. Maria, one of the other waitresses, practically pulled me into the storage room the moment I walked through the back door. "Dio mio, Sophia," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Do you know who's coming tonight?" I shook my head, slipping off my worn jacket and reaching for my apron. "Dante Ricci." The name hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications. My hands froze on the apron strings. "The Dante Ricci? The one who owns half of Northside?" Maria nodded vigorously, and probably the other half unofficially. "Marco says the kitchen's been prepping since dawn. Special menu, special wine, special everything." A cold knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. Everyone in the city knew the Ricci name, though it was rarely spoken above a whisper. Legitimate businessman on paper, with investments spanning real estate, import-export, and high-end restaurants like Bella Notte. But the whispers told a different story. One of protection rackets, smuggled goods, and rivals who mysteriously disappeared after crossing him. "Why is he coming here?" I asked, smoothing down my shirt with trembling hands. "Doesn't he have his own restaurants?" Maria shrugged. "Apparently he's meeting someone important. Mr. Gallo assigned Antonio to their table, of course." She rolled her eyes. Antonio was the most experienced server, the one who handled all the VIPs and collected the generous tips that came with them. Relief flooded through me. At least I wouldn't have to serve him. I could stay in my section near the kitchen, far from whatever business Dante Ricci had at Bella Notte tonight. The evening progressed normally at first. I moved between my tables with practiced efficiency, reciting specials in either English or Italian depending on the customer's preferences. The familiar rhythm of service: take order, deliver drinks, bring food, check satisfaction, clear plates, present bill, kept my mind occupied and my anxiety at bay, until Mr. Gallo appeared at my elbow as I was entering an order into the system, his forehead shiny with sweat. "Sophia," he said, his voice strained. "Antonio called in sick, food poisoning." I blinked at him, not yet comprehending what this meant for me. "I need you to take the private dining room." The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. They specifically requested an Italian-speaking server, and you're the only one besides Antonio who's fluent. "But Mr. Gallo, I've never handled the private room before," I protested weakly. "Surely Maria or their Italian isn't good enough," he cut me off. "Besides, Signor Ricci and his guests have already been waiting for 10 minutes. He straightened my collar with jittery hands. Just be professional, attentive but not hovering. And for God's sake, don't eavesdrop or stare. Before I could form another objection, he was guiding me toward the private dining room at the back of the restaurant, a secluded space reserved for those willing to pay for absolute privacy. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I could feel beads of sweat forming at my hairline, despite the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. "Remember," Mr. Gallo murmured as we reached the heavy oak door, "they're just customers. Very important, very generous customers." He knocked once, then pushed the door open, ushering me inside with a hand at the small of my back. The private dining room was dimly lit, with a single crystal chandelier casting a warm glow over the long mahogany table. 5 men were seated around it, their conversation dropping to silence as we entered. 4 of them were clearly guards or associates, broad-shouldered men in dark suits who assessed me with cold, calculating eyes before dismissing me as no threat. But it was the 5th man who commanded the room, who seemed to pull all the light and air toward him, like a black hole bending the fabric of space. Dante Ricci didn't look like the monster from the whispered stories. He was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp, aristocratic features and olive skin. His suit was clearly bespoke, the charcoal fabric draping perfectly over his broad shoulders. Dark hair, just long enough to show a hint of wave, was swept back from a face that might have belonged on a Renaissance painting, rather than a man rumored to have ordered countless deaths. "Signor Ricci," Mr. Gallo said, his voice unnaturally high, "please accept my apologies for the delay. This is Sophia, your server for the evening. She speaks fluent Italian and will take excellent care of you." Those dark eyes shifted to me, and I felt a physical jolt as his gaze locked with mine, assessing, penetrating, seeing far more than I wanted anyone to see. His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in those depths. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "Buonasera, Signor Ricci," I managed, proud that my voice remained steady despite the tremor in my hands, which I concealed by clasping them behind my back. "Sono Sofia. Sarò la vostra cameriera stasera. Posso offrirvi qualcosa da bere?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. Not warm, exactly, but approving. When he spoke, his Italian was flawless, the accent distinctly northern, from somewhere around Milan or Lake Como. "Un piacere, Sofia. Bottiglia di Brunello di Montalcino, Riserva 2018. I nodded, making a mental note of the expensive wine selection. "Certamente. E per l'acqua? Naturale o frizzante?" "Frizzante," he replied, still watching me with that unnervingly intense gaze. The other men around the table remained silent, deferring completely to him. "I'll bring your drinks right away and give you a few moments with the menu," I said, switching to English and backing toward the door. Just as my hand touched the handle, his voice stopped me, now in perfect, unaccented English. "You're not Italian-born." It wasn't a question, but I felt compelled to answer anyway. "No, sir. My grandmother is from Florence. She raised me." He nodded, as though confirming something to himself. "Your accent is unusual. Regional but precise. Academic but natural." His head tilted slightly. "Interesting." The word hung in the air between us, laden with implications I couldn't decipher. I mumbled something about checking on their wine and escaped, my heart thundering in my chest as though I'd narrowly avoided a predator. In the relative safety of the service area, I pressed my back against the wall and took several deep breaths. What was it about this man that had rattled me so completely? I'd served wealthy, powerful people before, though perhaps none with Dante Ricci's particular reputation. But it wasn't fear alone that had my pulse racing and my skin tingling with hyper-awareness. It was the way he had looked at me, really looked, when most people's eyes slid over me as if I were part of the furniture. It was the focused attention, like I was a puzzle he found worthy of solving. I gathered the requested drinks with mechanical precision, the sparkling water in crystal glasses, the wine selected from our temperature-controlled cabinet and decanted with careful hands. By the time I returned to the private room, I had composed myself. I was just a waitress doing her job, invisible but efficient, nothing more. Or so I thought. As the evening progressed, I moved in and out of the private dining room with practiced grace, serving each course of the elaborate meal with minimal interruption to their conversation, which switched fluidly between English and Italian. I kept my eyes downcast, my expression neutral, but I couldn't help noticing how the conversation would often pause when I entered, resuming only after I'd left. And I couldn't help noticing how Dante Ricci's eyes followed me, not with the leering appraisal I occasionally endured from certain customers, but with something more complex. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up and my skin flush with heat that had nothing to do with the kitchen's warmth. During the dessert course, a delicate panna cotta with fresh berries, disaster struck. As I leaned between two of the bodyguards to place Dante's dessert before him, one of the men shifted suddenly, bumping my arm. The dessert tilted, then slid from the plate entirely, landing with a soft splat directly onto Dante Ricci's pristine white shirt and charcoal tie. Time seemed to freeze. The room fell silent, the atmosphere instantly charged with tension. The man who had bumped me went pale, stammering apologies in rapid Italian. I stood paralyzed, the empty plate still in my hand, horror washing over me in a cold wave. "Mi dispiace tantissimo, signor Ricci," I gasped, grabbing a napkin and instinctively reaching toward the mess. "I'm so sorry. I'll get something to clean." His hand caught my wrist before I could touch him. The grip firm, but not painful. Our eyes met, and for a terrifying moment I saw something dangerous flash in those dark depths. Then, to my astonishment, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It was an accident," he said, his voice low and controlled. He released my wrist and turned to the man beside him, who was still apologizing profusely. "Carlo, enough, it's just dessert." But the atmosphere remained tense, the other men watching me with a mixture of pity and wariness, as though I had unwittingly signed my own death warrant. I backed away, mumbling more apologies, and fled to the kitchen to fetch cleaning supplies and report the disaster to Mr. Gallo. My boss's face drained of color when I told him what had happened. "Go back immediately," he ordered, thrusting a clean napkin and club soda into my hands. "Offer to pay for dry cleaning whatever he wants. And pray he's in a forgiving mood." When I returned to the private room, Dante had removed his tie and was dabbing at the stain with a napkin. He looked up as I entered, those dark eyes unreadable. "Signor Ricci," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "please allow me to help clean your shirt. And I insist on paying for your dry cleaning. I'm so terribly sorry about this." To my surprise, he actually smiled, a small, tight expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The tie is ruined, but the shirt will survive. It was an accident, as I said." I approached cautiously and offered the club soda and clean napkin. As he took them from me, our fingers brushed, and an inexplicable current seemed to pass between us, making me jerk back slightly. His eyes narrowed, noticing my reaction. "You're afraid of me," he stated matter-of-factly. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Denying it would be an obvious lie, but admitting it seemed dangerous too. "I respect your position, sir," I finally managed. Something like amusement flickered across his face. "A diplomatic answer." He gestured to the dessert mess. "Perhaps you could bring me another? I find I was looking forward to it." "Of course. Right away." I quickly cleaned up the spilled dessert and retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. When I returned with a fresh panna cotta, the men had resumed their conversation, though it felt more subdued than before. I placed the dessert carefully before Dante, taking extra care to avoid another accident. "Grazie, Sofia," he said, my name rolling off his tongue in a way that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Prego, signor Ricci. Will there be anything else?" He considered me for a moment, then said something that changed the course of my life forever. "What time do you finish work tonight?" The question hung in the air between us, unexpected and loaded with implications I wasn't ready to face. My mouth went dry, and I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room on me. The bodyguards exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from surprise to veiled amusement. My voice caught, and I cleared my throat. "I finish at 11, sir." Dante nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I'll have my driver waiting." It wasn't a request or even an invitation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with absolute certainty that it would be accepted without question. Panic flared in my chest. That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. It's late. He cut me off smoothly, his tone gentle but brooking no argument. And I believe you mentioned to your colleague earlier that you live in Westridge. It's not safe for a woman alone at that hour. My blood ran cold. Westridge was indeed my neighborhood, but I hadn't mentioned it tonight, not to anyone. The implication was clear. He already knew things about me, had perhaps been watching me even before this evening. I'd take the bus, I said weakly, a last feeble attempt at resistance. His expression darkened slightly. No, you won't. 3 simple words, spoken softly but with such authority that they seemed to reshape reality around us. I insist, Sophia. Consider it an apology for my associate's carelessness with your dessert tray. One of the bodyguards, Carlo, the one who had bumped me, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dante didn't look at him, but the man's discomfort deepened, as if he could feel his boss's displeasure like a physical weight. Thank you. That's very generous. The words came automatically, though every instinct screamed that accepting a ride from Dante Ricci was a dangerous proposition. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and lighting up those dark eyes. Excellent. Now, we'll take the check whenever you're ready. I nodded and backed out of the room, my mind spinning. What had I just agreed to? And what would happen if I simply slipped out the back door at the end of my shift, avoiding him entirely? As if reading my thoughts, Mr. Gallo appeared at my elbow as I was processing their payment. Signor Ricci has added a generous tip, he informed me, eyes wide as he looked at the amount. And he's asked me to ensure you don't leave without speaking to him. My hands trembled as I counted out the register. Mr. Gallo, I don't think... Sophia. His voice dropped to a whisper. Whatever he wants, it would be unwise to refuse. Men like Dante Ricci aren't accustomed to hearing no. He squeezed my shoulder. Just be polite, accept the ride, and thank him. It's probably just a wealthy man being gallant, but we both knew it wasn't that simple. Men like Dante Ricci didn't offer rides to waitresses out of mere gallantry. The remainder of my shift passed in a blur of anxiety. I moved mechanically between tables, taking orders and delivering food, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating risks, weighing options, and always circling back to the same conclusion. I had no real choice but to accept the ride. At precisely 11, I clocked out, changed from my work shoes to slightly more comfortable flats, and grabbed my worn leather jacket from the employee locker room. Maria caught me at the back door, her eyes wide with curiosity. Is it true? She whispered. Ricci offered you a ride home? News traveled fast in restaurants. I nodded reluctantly. Dio mio, Sophia. She gripped my arm. Be careful. I've heard stories about girls who catch his eye. What stories? I asked, my stomach clenching with dread. She shook her head. They tend to disappear from their normal lives. New apartments, new clothes, new everything. She hesitated. Some say it's because they want to. Others say, she trailed off, leaving the darker implications unspoken. It's just a ride, I insisted, trying to convince myself as much as her. Nothing more. Maria looked unconvinced, but squeezed my hand. Text me when you get home, okay? And if you don't, she bit her lip. I will, I promised. It's really nothing. But as I stepped outside into the cool night air, I knew it wasn't nothing. A sleek black Bentley idled at the curb, its windows tinted to near opacity. As I approached, the rear door swung open, revealing Dante Ricci seated in the luxurious interior, his phone in one hand, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Sophia, he said, my name rolling off his tongue like something precious. Please, join me. I hesitated for just a heartbeat before sliding into the seat beside him, the door closing with a soft thud that sounded eerily final to my heightened senses. The interior smelled of expensive leather and his cologne, something subtle and masculine, with notes of sandalwood and amber. I sat rigidly, my purse clutched in my lap, acutely aware of his presence beside me. Your address? He asked, one eyebrow raised. I gave it to him, and he relayed it to the driver, a broad-shouldered man whose eyes I briefly met in the rearview mirror before he nodded and pulled away from the curb. You're uncomfortable, Dante observed after a moment of silence, his tone conversational. I swallowed hard. I'm not accustomed to riding in vehicles like this, I said carefully. He smiled, a small, knowing expression. That's not why you're uncomfortable, Sophia. You're afraid of me. The directness caught me off guard. I don't know you, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Yet you fear me. It wasn't a question. Because of things you've heard, I assume. I remained silent, unsure how to respond without putting myself in danger. He sighed, leaning back against the seat. Most of what you've heard is likely true, he said, surprising me with his frankness. I am not a good man, by conventional standards, but I do have principles. He turned toward me, his dark eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. I never harm innocent women. The qualification, innocent women, sent a chill down my spine. What happened to the ones he deemed not innocent? I don't mean to offend you, I said softly. It's just unexpected, this situation. Because men like me don't notice women like you. There was an edge to his voice now, a hint of something dangerous, because powerful men rarely notice invisible people unless they need something from them, I clarified, surprising myself with my boldness. His expression shifted, surprise and something like respect flickering across his features. You think yourself invisible? I glanced down at my simple clothes, my unadorned hands. I am. To most people. Not to me. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. You're Italian. It caught my attention first. Most American-born speakers have a certain academic quality to their accent. Yours sounds like home. He studied me. But it was your eyes that truly caught my interest. They reveal everything you try to hide. My pulse quickened. And what do they reveal, Signor Ricci? Intelligence? Determination? Resilience? He paused. And a profound sadness. I looked away, unnerved by how accurately he had read me. You're very observant. In my position, observation is survival. The car slowed as we approached my neighborhood, a far cry from wherever Dante Ricci called home, with its modest apartment buildings and small convenience stores still open despite the late hour. You live with your grandmother, yes? The one from Florence. I nodded, wondering again how much he already knew about me. She raised me after my parents died. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, sounding genuinely sympathetic. Family is everything. It is, I agreed, thinking of Nonna and her mounting medical bills. The reason I worked double shifts and still barely made ends meet. The car pulled up in front of my building, a 3-story walk-up that had seen better days. I reached for the door handle, eager to escape the confining intimacy of the back seat. Sophia. His voice stopped me. I have a proposition for you. My hand froze on the handle, my heart suddenly pounding. A proposition? Not that kind, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Though I won't pretend I find you anything less than captivating. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to me. I'm hosting a private dinner at my home this weekend. Several important associates from Italy will be there. I need someone who speaks the language flawlessly to assist with service and translation. I took the card cautiously, feeling the weight of the heavy cardstock between my fingers. You have staff for that, surely. I do, but none with your particular skill. He named a figure for a single evening's work that made my eyes widen. More than I earned in 2 weeks at Bellinota. Your grandmother's medication is expensive, isn't it? The reference to Nonna's health situation confirmed my suspicions that he had been investigating me, perhaps for longer than just today. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. He was offering a solution to my most pressing problem, even if it came with strings I couldn't yet see. Why me? I asked. There must be professional translators. They lack your authenticity, your understanding of the nuances. His gaze was intense, focused entirely on me, and they aren't you. The last words hung between us, charged with unspoken meaning. This wasn't just about my language skills, and we both knew it. I'll consider it, I said finally, slipping the card into my jacket pocket. The address and details are on the card. Saturday, 7 p.m. He spoke as if my acceptance was already assured. My driver will collect you at 6. I nodded and opened the door, stepping out into the night air that suddenly felt fresh and freeing after the heady atmosphere of the car. Before closing the door, I leaned down to look at him one more time. "Thank you for the ride, Signor Ricci." His expression softened slightly. "Dante," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Sophia Russo." As the car pulled away, I stood on the sidewalk, the business card burning a hole in my pocket, and my mind racing with questions and possibilities. I hadn't given him my last name. Upstairs, Nonna was asleep in her armchair, an Italian soap opera playing softly on the television. I gently woke her and helped her to bed, answering her drowsy questions about my evening with carefully edited responses. Once she was settled, I sat at our small kitchen table and took out Dante's card, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. I knew I should throw it away, call in sick on Saturday, perhaps even look for another job, in another restaurant, far from Bellinata and the dangerous man who had noticed me there. Instead, I placed it carefully in my wallet, already knowing what my answer would be. Saturday arrived too quickly, the intervening days a blur of double shifts at Bellanotte and worried conversations with Nonna, who sensed something had changed despite my attempts to hide it. I told her I'd been offered a private catering job, technically true if incomplete, and that the pay would cover her next 3 months of medication. That detail silenced her concerns. Though I caught her watching me with worried eyes as I prepared for the evening, I stood before the mirror in my small bedroom, assessing my appearance with critical eyes. The black dress I'd chosen was the nicest thing I owned, simple but elegant, with a modest neckline and hem that fell just below my knees, professional enough for service, but a far cry from my usual waitress uniform. I'd spent an hour taming my hair into a sleek chignon and applied minimal makeup to enhance my features without looking overdone. "Sei bellissima," Nonna said from the doorway, her eyes misting slightly. "So beautiful, like your mother." I swallowed the lump in my throat and kissed her cheek. "I won't be late," I promised. "And I'll have my phone if you need anything." She patted my hand. "This man who hired you," she began cautiously, "is he a good man?" The question pierced me with its simplicity and its impossibility. "He's a powerful man," I answered honestly, "and he's paying very well." Her eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with wisdom, studied my face. "Be careful, Nipotina. Power and goodness rarely walk hand in hand." "I will, Nonna." I hugged her fragile frame, breathing in her familiar scent. "I promise." Exactly at 6, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Car waiting downstairs. The black Bentley was indeed idling at the curb, the same broad-shouldered driver standing beside it. He nodded respectfully as I approached. "Miss Russo," he said, opening the door for me. I had half expected, perhaps half hoped, that Dante would be waiting inside, but the back seat was empty. As we pulled away from my building, I tried to quell the nervous flutter in my stomach. This was just a job, I reminded myself. A well-paying job that would ease our financial burden for months. Nothing more. The city fell away as we drove north, expensive storefronts giving way to gated communities, and eventually to large estates set back from the road. After passing through an imposing security gate, we followed a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees until Dante Ricci's home came into view. Home was an understatement. The sprawling mansion of pale stone gleamed in the early evening light, its facade reminiscent of the grand villas that dotted the Italian countryside. Fountains flanked the circular driveway where several luxury vehicles were already parked, and armed security personnel stood discreetly near each entrance. The driver escorted me to a side door where a stern-faced woman in a tailored suit waited. "Miss Russo." She greeted me with a curt nod. "I'm Helena, Mr. Ricci's house manager. Follow me." She led me through a maze of hallways, the interior of the mansion even more impressive than its exterior. Old-world elegance blended seamlessly with modern luxury. Priceless art adorned walls of exposed stone, and antique furniture shared space with sleek contemporary pieces. It was like walking through a carefully curated museum, where every object told a story of power and refined taste. Helena stopped before a heavy wooden door. "Mr. Ricci wishes to speak with you before the guests arrive." She knocked once, then stepped back. "Enter when called." My heart hammered against my ribs as a deep voice responded, "Avanti." I pushed open the door to find myself in a wood-paneled study. Bookshelves lined 3 walls from floor to ceiling, their contents appearing well-read rather than merely decorative. A massive desk dominated one side of the room, but Dante wasn't seated behind it. He stood at the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens, a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. He turned as I entered, and I felt that same jolt of awareness I'd experienced in the restaurant. He wore another impeccably tailored suit, this one a deep navy that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hand through it repeatedly, and the fading sunlight cast his sharp features in dramatic relief. Sophia. My name on his lips still sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I replied, remaining near the door, uncertain of the protocol for this strange arrangement. "I hope I'm dressed appropriately for the evening." He approached, stopping a few feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, but not so close as to make me uncomfortable. Perfect, as I expected. His eyes moved over me with an appreciation that was admiring, rather than leering. "Would you like a drink before I explain tonight's arrangements?" I shook my head. "I should keep a clear head if I'm working." Something like approval flickered in his expression. Sensible. "Though this won't be quite the service position you're accustomed to." He gestured to a pair of leather armchairs near the fireplace. "Please, sit for a moment." I perched on the edge of the chair, my back straight, hands folded in my lap. He sat across from me, setting his drink aside and leaning forward slightly. "Tonight's dinner is primarily business, but conducted as pleasure," he explained. 6 guests, all Italian, all men with significant influence in various enterprises. They expect a certain level of accommodation. "I understand," I said carefully. "You want me to serve and translate when needed." He shook his head slightly. "I want you to dine with us." My confusion must have shown on my face because he continued, "These men respect power, family, and tradition. In their eyes, a man who handles his own service is either too poor to afford staff or too insignificant to warrant them. But a beautiful, intelligent woman who speaks their language fluently?" His lips curved in a slight smile. "That's an asset they'll respect." "You want me to pretend to be, what, your girlfriend?" I asked, heat rising to my cheeks. "Nothing so defined," he replied smoothly. "My guest. Nothing more will be stated or implied." He studied my reaction. "Does that make you uncomfortable?" It should have. Every warning bell in my head was ringing, yet I found myself considering it. Will I still be paid the amount we discussed? Of course. This changes nothing about our financial arrangement. He reached for his drink, taking a small sip. "I'm merely asking you to sit at my table, rather than stand beside it." I considered for a moment. "I'm not sure I understand why you need me for this role." "Surely there are women in your circle who could—" "Women in my circle," he interrupted, a hint of derision in his tone, "tend to be decorative rather than substantive. They speak of designer labels and luxury vacations, not literature or history or art." His eyes held mine, and none speak Italian with the soul of Florence in their voice. The compliment, unexpected and oddly specific, warmed something inside me that had been cold for too long. What would be expected of me, exactly? "Conversation, intelligence, nothing more." He set his glass down decisively. "And perhaps your insights afterward. These men reveal themselves differently when a beautiful woman is present." I should have been offended at being used as a tool for his business machinations, but his frank admission was refreshing compared to the platitudes I might have expected. "All right," I agreed finally. "But I have conditions." One eyebrow arched in surprise. Clearly, Dante Ricci wasn't accustomed to conditions being placed on his offers. "I'm listening." "I won't pretend to be something I'm not," I stated firmly. "No fictional background or relationship. If asked, I tell the truth about who I am and what I do." He nodded slowly. "Acceptable. Though perhaps omit the financial arrangements of tonight, of course." I straightened my shoulders. "And I leave when the dinner concludes. No additional expectations." A flash of something, anger, amusement, crossed his face. "I told you before, Sophia, I don't harm innocent women, nor do I pay for companionship." His voice had taken on that dangerous edge again. "Is that clear enough?" I nodded, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed. "Then we understand each other. I doubt that very much," he murmured, rising from his chair. "But we have an agreement." He offered his hand to help me up, and I took it after only a moment's hesitation. His fingers were warm and strong around mine, the contact sending an unexpected thrill through my body. He held on a fraction longer than necessary before releasing me. "The guests will arrive in 30 minutes, he said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "Helena will show you to the dining room and explain the seating arrangement." He paused, his eyes holding mine. "Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate your adaptability." As promised, Helena appeared moments after I left Dante's study, guiding me through more opulent hallways to a formal dining room that took my breath away. The table could have seated 20, but was set for 8, with fine china, crystal, and silver that probably cost more than a year's rent on our apartment. A small army of staff moved efficiently around the space, making final adjustments to flowers and place settings. "You'll be seated here to Mr. Ricci's right," Helena informed me, indicating a place card with my name written in elegant calligraphy. "The guest of honor, Mr. Vannucci, will be on his left." She proceeded to give me a brief rundown of the other guests, all Italian businessmen with connections to shipping, finance, or real estate, all powerful in their own spheres, though none as powerful as Dante himself. "One last thing," she added, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Ricci rarely brings women to these dinners. You'll be observed, evaluated." "I understand," I replied, though I wasn't sure I did. Not fully. "I don't think you do," she said quietly, "but you will." Before I could ask what she meant, the first car arrived, and everything was set in motion. Dante appeared at my side as if conjured, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of my back as he guided me to the foyer to greet his guests. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and thinly veiled assessments. The Italian businessmen, all older than Dante, all exuding that particular brand of Mediterranean machismo, looked at me with varying degrees of surprise, appreciation, and speculation. I smiled politely, responded in fluent Italian when addressed, and kept my answers about my background honest but vague. Dante remained close, his presence both reassuring and unnerving. Each time he introduced me, his hand would return to the small of my back, a gesture that seemed both protective and possessive. I noticed how the other men's attitudes shifted subtly in response, their initial appraising looks giving way to a more respectful distance, as if I had been marked as territory. By the time we moved to the dining room, I had begun to understand what Helena meant. These men weren't just evaluating me as a woman. They were evaluating what my presence at Dante's side might signify. About him, about his intentions, about potential weaknesses or strengths. And as the first course was served and conversation flowed around me in rapid Italian, I realized I had stepped into a world far more complex and dangerous than I had imagined. A world where even a dinner party was a carefully choreographed dance of power, alliances, and hidden agendas. A world that, despite every rational warning bell in my mind, I found myself drawn to like a moth to a dangerous flame. The dinner progressed with the precision of a military operation disguised as casual elegance. Course after exquisite course appeared and disappeared, each accompanied by perfectly paired wines that I sipped cautiously, aware that maintaining my clarity of mind was essential in this nest of vipers. I observed how Dante commanded the table without obvious effort. His Italian flowed naturally as he discussed business prospects in Milan, art acquisitions in Florence, and political developments in Rome. All topics I understood well enough to follow, though some of the underlying implications remained opaque to me. Throughout it all, he would occasionally turn to include me in the conversation with a question or comment that showcased my knowledge without putting me on the spot. Sophia spent her summers in Florence with her grandmother, he mentioned during a discussion about the city's restoration projects. Near Santa Croce, wasn't it? I nodded, surprised he had retained this detail from our brief conversations. Yes, in a little apartment off Via Ghibellina, my grandmother would take me to the Uffizi every Sunday after Mass. This prompted a nostalgic tangent about favorite Florentine landmarks that temporarily lightened the underlying tension at the table. I noticed how Dante watched me during these exchanges, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth when I spoke passionately about Botticelli's Primavera, or described the perfect gelato from a tiny shop near the Ponte Vecchio. The oldest guest, Venucci, a silver-haired man with shrewd eyes and an elaborate gold watch that he consulted frequently, seemed particularly interested in my background. "And what brings a Florentine rose to our humble city?" he asked, his gaze flicking between Dante and me with undisguised curiosity. "Circumstance and necessity," I answered honestly. "My grandmother's health required a move, and we had distant family here who could help initially. And now you assist Dante with his business endeavors?" The question carried weighted implications. Before I could respond, Dante's hand came to rest on mine where it lay on the table, a gesture both casual and deliberate that sent a jolt of awareness up my arm. His thumb traced a small circle on my skin, so briefly I might have imagined it. "Sophia has a remarkable ability to see what others miss," he said, his tone light, but his eyes conveying something more serious to Venucci. "A quality I've come to value greatly." The older man nodded slowly, understanding some message I couldn't fully decipher. "Indeed. Such perception is rare." He raised his glass in a small toast toward me. "And precious." As the dinner moved into its final courses, I became increasingly aware of the currents flowing beneath the seemingly mundane conversation. Business discussions veiled in metaphor, alliances formed and tested through casual mentions of shared acquaintances, subtle warnings delivered in anecdotes about unfortunate ends met by unnamed associates. It was fascinating and terrifying, like watching predators circle each other in an elaborate dance where one misstep could be fatal. Throughout it all, Dante remained controlled, commanding, and, most disconcertingly, attentive to me in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. When I shivered slightly as the air conditioning cycled on, he immediately noticed and signaled to a staff member who appeared with a fine cashmere wrap for my shoulders. When the conversation ventured into territory clearly meant to exclude me, crude jokes and references to entertainment procured during past business trips, he smoothly redirected it with a few choice words that made it clear such topics were unwelcome in my presence. By the time dessert was served, a delicate tiramisu that momentarily transported me to my grandmother's kitchen, I had gained a new understanding of the man seated beside me. Dante Ricci was dangerous, yes, and capable of violence and ruthlessness I could only imagine. But he also possessed a code, principles that governed his actions and shaped the world around him. He commanded respect not merely through fear, but through a complex alchemy of intimidation, intelligence, and what could almost be called honor. And most disturbing of all, I found myself drawn to him, not despite the danger he represented, but in some confused, primal way, because of it. After dessert, Dante suggested the men retire to the terrace for cigars and cognac. As they rose from the table, he turned to me. "Would you prefer to join us or take coffee in the library? Helena can show you." The choice itself was significant, offering me an escape from the masculine ritual to follow while making it clear I was welcome to join if I wished. "The library, I think," I replied, sensing that the men might speak more freely without my presence, which would give Dante an advantage he clearly sought. "If you don't mind." "Of course." His fingers brushed my shoulder as he helped adjust the wrap around me, a fleeting touch that nonetheless left my skin tingling. "I'll join you when our guests depart." The library proved to be my idea of heaven. A vast, 2-story room with rolling ladders to access upper shelves, comfortable reading nooks, and volumes in multiple languages arranged by subject rather than mere aesthetics. Helena brought coffee on a silver tray, then discreetly withdrew, leaving me alone in this sanctuary of knowledge. I moved slowly along the shelves, trailing my fingers across leather spines and cloth bindings, breathing in the comforting scent of paper and ink. Many of the books were first editions or rare prints, their value immeasurable to collectors. I carefully selected a volume of Dante Alighieri's works, an irony not lost on me, and settled into a deep armchair near the fireplace, where flames crackled softly. I lost track of time as I immersed myself in the familiar rhythm of the poetry, the words transporting me far from this mansion and its dangerous owner. When the library door opened, I started, looking up to find Dante watching me from the threshold, his expression unreadable. "The Divine Comedy," he noted, approaching with silent steps. "A fitting choice." I closed the book carefully, Are your guests gone? All but Venucci. He's taking a call in my study. He lowered himself into the chair opposite mine, loosening his tie with one hand, the gesture oddly intimate. Did you find everything comfortable here? It's a beautiful room, I said sincerely. Your collection is impressive. Many were my father's. Others I've acquired over the years. He studied me for a moment. You did well tonight. Better than well. Thank you. I set the book aside. Did I serve your purpose, whatever it was? A smile touched his lips, direct as always. Yes, you did. He leaned back in the chair, his posture relaxing slightly. Venucci controls several shipping lanes I need access to. He's traditional, old-school Sicilian. Values family, loyalty, culture. A man who speaks 4 languages but trusts only those who speak his mother tongue. And my presence demonstrated what? That you appreciate the same things? That, and more. His dark eyes held mine. It showed I can recognize value beyond the obvious, intelligence beyond ambition, beauty beyond display. The compliments delivered in his matter-of-fact tone warmed me despite my determination to remain detached. I'm glad I could help then. He asked about you, Dante continued, watching my reaction closely. After you left. My pulse quickened. What did he ask? Whether you were under my protection. The phrase carried weight beyond its simple words. A status, a designation in his world that meant far more than casual association. And what did you tell him? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Dante's gaze was steady, unwavering. I told him yes. The single word hung between us, laden with implications I wasn't sure I fully understood, or wanted to. I didn't ask for your protection, I said finally. No, you didn't. He leaned forward slightly. But in my world, Sophia, there are rarely neutral positions. One is either protected or vulnerable. And I find I cannot bear the thought of you being vulnerable. I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. What does that mean exactly, this protection? It means no one in my organization or sphere of influence will harm you. It means certain privileges and considerations. His voice dropped slightly. It also means association with me, with all the benefits and complications that entails. And what do you expect in return? I asked, the practical question slipping out before I could soften it. Rather than being offended, he seemed to appreciate my directness. Initially, nothing beyond what you've already given tonight. Your presence, your insight. He paused. Perhaps in time, your trust. Trust is earned, I said quietly. Yes, it is. He rose from the chair in a fluid motion and extended his hand to me. Come. I should get you home to your grandmother. It's late. I placed my hand in his, allowing him to help me to my feet. We stood close for a moment, too close, his cologne enveloping me, his warmth radiating in the space between us. I looked up to find his eyes darker than before, intent on my face with an expression that made my breath catch. Dante. A voice called from the doorway, breaking the moment. Venucci stood there, his phone still in hand, eyes moving between us with knowing assessment. Forgive the interruption. My car has arrived. Dante stepped back smoothly, though his hand remained at the small of my back. Of course. We'll walk you out. As we moved through the mansion toward the front entrance, Venucci fell into step beside me. It was a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Russo, he said in Italian. A true daughter of Florence. Rare to find such authenticity so far from home. Grazie, Signor Venucci, I replied in the same language. The pleasure was mine. At the door, he took my hand and bowed over it in an old-world gesture. I hope we'll meet again. His eyes shifted to Dante. She brings light to your shadows, my friend. Don't lose her. After Venucci's departure, Dante instructed his driver to bring the car around, then turned to me. I have something for you before you go. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small envelope, pressing it into my hand. Your payment, as agreed. The envelope was heavy, and I knew without looking that it contained cash, probably more than the agreed-upon amount. Thank you, I said, slipping it into my purse. There's something else. He produced a small box, about the size of a deck of cards. A gift. Not part of our arrangement. I hesitated, understanding instinctively that accepting a gift changed the nature of our interaction in some fundamental way. I can't. You can, he interrupted gently. It's not diamonds or obligation, Sophia. Just something practical. Curiosity won over caution, and I accepted the box, opening it to find a sleek smartphone, clearly expensive and new. I looked up in confusion. Your current phone has a cracked screen and dies by mid-afternoon, he explained. This one has better battery life and a direct line to me if you ever need anything. He raised a hand when I started to protest. It's prepaid for 2 years. No tracking, no monitoring, just reliable communication. For your grandmother's sake, if nothing else. The mention of Nonna hit its mark. A reliable phone would ease my constant worry about being unreachable in an emergency. Still, I hesitated. It's a phone, Sophia, not a collar. Dante said softly, reading my reluctance. Accept it or don't, but don't overthink it. His driver appeared at that moment to announce the car was ready. Dante walked me out, his hand again finding that spot at the small of my back that was beginning to feel like it belonged to him. At the car, he opened the door for me, but stopped me with a light touch on my arm before I could slide inside. One more thing, he said, his voice low. There's a charity gala at the art museum next Saturday. I'd like you to accompany me. It wasn't phrased as a command, yet it didn't quite feel like a request either. As your translator again? I asked. As my guest. His eyes held mine. Properly this time. I'll send a car at 7. I should have said no. Should have maintained boundaries, kept our arrangement transactional and limited. Instead, I heard myself say, I don't have anything suitable to wear to a gala. A smile curved his lips, a genuine one that reached his eyes and transformed his face. That can be arranged. Is that a yes? I nodded, unable to form the refusal my better judgment screamed for. Yes. The week passed in a daze of normality that felt increasingly surreal. I worked my shifts at Bella Notte, helped Nonna with her physical therapy exercises, and pretended that my life hadn't fundamentally changed, but it had. The envelope of cash had paid Nonna's medical bills for the next 4 months, with enough left over to repair our ancient refrigerator. The new phone sat on my nightstand, its presence both reassuring and unsettling, and Dante Ricci occupied my thoughts in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. He didn't contact me until Wednesday, when a simple text arrived. Looking forward to Saturday. Car will arrive at 6:30 instead of 7. D. No questions about my welfare, no small talk, no pressure. Just a straightforward communication that somehow left me more intrigued than a dozen flowery messages might have. I replied with a simple, I'll be ready, then spent an embarrassing amount of time wondering if I should have said more. On Thursday, a delivery arrived. A large garment bag from an exclusive boutique I'd never dared enter, accompanied by a sleek box containing shoes and a small clutch purse. The note inside read simply, No pressure to wear these if they don't suit. D. Inside the bag hung a gown that took my breath away. A deep midnight blue that shimmered subtly when it moved, with a classic silhouette that managed to be both elegant and subtly sensual. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself if I'd had unlimited resources, which was both impressive and slightly unnerving. Nonna watched me hold it against myself in front of the mirror, her expression thoughtful. This man, she said carefully, he's more than an employer, isn't he? I couldn't lie to her. I don't know what he is, Nonna, not exactly. She took my hand, her papery skin cool against mine. I see how your eyes change when you speak of him. Be careful with your heart, Nipotina. Men with power often love that power more than they can ever love a woman. It's not like that, I insisted, though I wasn't entirely sure what it was. It's complicated. Love always is, she replied with the wisdom of her years. Just remember who you are, Sophia. Don't lose yourself in his world. Saturday evening arrived with a flurry of nervous preparation. The dress fit as if it had been made for me, the fabric draping perfectly over my curves without being overly revealing. The shoes, thankfully, were elegant but comfortable, with heels high enough to be fashionable without making walking a challenge. I arranged my hair in a simple updo and applied makeup with a lighter hand than I might have expected for such an event, instinctively understanding that Dante preferred subtlety to ostentation. When I emerged from my bedroom, Nonna's eyes filled with tears. Bellissima, she whispered, just like your mother on her wedding day. that same glow. Her words sent a complicated ripple of emotions through me: pride, sadness for the mother I barely remembered, and a sudden, sharp awareness of what this evening might represent. This wasn't just another job. It was a step into Dante's world on different terms, a public acknowledgement of something between us that remained undefined. The black Bentley arrived precisely at 6:30, but this time, Dante himself emerged when the driver opened the door. He stood on the sidewalk looking up at my building, commanding in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair styled impeccably. When I stepped outside, his expression changed subtly, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of his lips that betrayed surprise or appreciation. "Sophia," he said simply, the words somehow conveying everything his controlled expression didn't. "Is this suitable?" I asked, suddenly uncertain despite the hours of preparation. He approached slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You are beyond suitable," he replied, his voice low. "You are magnificent." Heat rose to my cheeks at the frank admiration in his gaze. He offered his arm, and I took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his sleeve. As he helped me into the car, his hand at my waist sent that now familiar current through my body, a response I was finding increasingly difficult to ignore. Inside the car, he kept a respectable distance, though his eyes returned to me frequently as we discussed the event ahead. The gala was a fundraiser for the city's art museum, bringing together wealthy patrons, artists, and the social elite, a world as foreign to me as Dante's more shadowy business dealings. "You seem nervous," he observed as we neared the venue. "I am," I admitted. "This isn't my normal environment." "Few people there tonight truly belong in that environment," he said with a hint of disdain. "Most are playing roles, pretending to understand art they cannot appreciate, displaying wealth they haven't earned, wielding influence they don't deserve." His expression softened as he looked at me. "You, at least, genuinely love art. That puts you ahead of most of the guests." "How did you know that?" I asked, surprised by his perception. "The way you spoke about the Uffizi, about Botticelli." "Aye," his lips curved in a slight smile. "Your eyes reveal everything, Sophia." As our car joined the line of luxury vehicles approaching the museum's grand entrance, I took a deep breath, centering myself. "What am I to you tonight, Dante? What role am I playing?" He considered me for a long moment, his dark eyes inscrutable. "No role. Just be yourself." He reached across the space between us to take my hand. "And stay close to me." Camera flashes greeted us as we stepped onto the red carpet, though I quickly realized they weren't for us, or at least not for me. Dante, however, drew attention merely by his presence, with subtle nods of acknowledgement from security personnel and nervous glances from event staff who scrambled to ensure everything was perfect as we passed. Inside, the museum had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. The massive central hall was filled with elegantly dressed guests, the air humming with conversation and quiet music from a string quartet. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres, while spotlighted artwork provided the ostensible focus of the evening. Dante's hand remained at the small of my back as he guided me through the crowd, introducing me simply as Sophia to a carefully selected few people, a curator he seemed to genuinely respect, an elderly art dealer who kissed my hand and spoke to me in rapid Florentine Italian, a city official who couldn't quite hide his nervousness despite his forced smile. I noted how people responded to Dante, with deference, fear, fascination, or some combination of all three. Women watched him with undisguised interest, their gazes often turning speculative or envious when they noted his attentiveness to me. Men either avoided direct eye contact or made too much of it, attempting to project confidence they clearly didn't feel in his presence. We paused before a small Caravaggio, the dramatic chiaroscuro depicting a biblical scene with the painter's characteristic intensity. As we admired it, I felt Dante watching me rather than the masterpiece. "What do you see?" he asked quietly. "Light and darkness fighting for dominance," I replied honestly. The subject caught between them, unable to fully exist in either realm. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or a kind of revelation. "Yes," he said simply. "Exactly that." As the evening progressed, I began to understand that this wasn't merely a social event for Dante. He moved through the room with purpose, having brief, seemingly casual conversations that I sensed carried significant weight beneath their mundane surfaces. Business conducted in plain sight, alliances formed and reinforced, subtle warnings delivered with a smile and a handshake. And through it all, he kept me close, included me in ways that made it clear to observers that I wasn't merely an accessory or arm candy, but someone whose presence mattered to him. When I spoke, he listened. When I admired a particular artwork, he took the time to appreciate it with me. When my feet began to tire from standing, he found us a quiet alcove with seating, before I had even mentioned my discomfort. It was during one of these moments, seated in a relatively private corner with glasses of champagne, that I finally asked the question that had been building in me all evening. Why me, Dante? Of all the women you could have brought tonight? Women who already belong in this world. Why choose a waitress who lives in a run-down apartment with her grandmother? He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his glass and turned to face me fully. Because you're real, he said finally. In my world, Sophia, authenticity is the rarest commodity. I am surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my influence, my protection. People who present carefully constructed facades and tell me what they think I want to hear. His voice dropped lower. But you... From the moment you spilled dessert on my shirt and looked at me with terror and defiance in those expressive eyes, you have been nothing but genuinely yourself. He reached out, his fingers lightly tracing the line of my jaw in a touch so gentle, it made my breath catch. Do you know how precious that is? How irresistible? I couldn't look away from the intensity in his gaze. It seems like a small thing to build whatever this is upon. It's everything, he countered. And this, as you call it, is something I haven't quite defined myself. His thumb brushed across my lower lip in a whisper of a touch. But I'd like to explore it further, if you're willing. The moment hung suspended between us, charged with possibility. I knew I stood at a crossroads, one path leading back to my ordinary life with its struggles and simple pleasures, the other leading into Dante's world of danger, luxury, and moral complexity. A world where I might lose myself, as Nona had warned. But looking into his eyes, I saw something beyond the powerful, dangerous man others feared. I saw loneliness, a hunger for connection, and a capacity for tenderness that perhaps no one else was allowed to witness. I'm willing, I said softly. But I need you to understand something. His hand stilled against my cheek. Tell me. I won't be owned or controlled, Dante. Protection is one thing, possession is another. I held his gaze steadily. I have to remain myself, even if I'm in your world. Something like admiration flickered in his expression. I wouldn't want you any other way, Sophia. Your fire is what draws me to you. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. I don't want to extinguish it. I want to bask in its light. Perhaps it was the champagne, or the romantic setting, or simply the culmination of the tension that had been building between us since that first night at Bellinotti. Whatever the reason, I found myself leaning toward him as he moved closer, our lips meeting in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something that made my heart race and my mind go blissfully blank. When we finally broke apart, his eyes had darkened to midnight, his controlled facade momentarily shattered to reveal raw desire and something more complex. A vulnerability I never expected to see in Dante Ricci. Come, he said, taking my hand and helping me to my feet. I think we've made enough of an appearance for tonight. As we left the gala, his arm wrapped possessively around my waist. I knew I was leaving more than just the event behind. I was stepping fully into a new chapter of my life, one filled with danger and passion, luxury and complexity. A life at the side of a man who moved in shadows, but who had somehow brought unexpected light into my world. In the car, as the city lights blurred past the windows, Dante held my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my skin. Where would you like to go? He asked, his voice soft in the dimness. I thought of Nonna waiting at home, of my shift at Bellinotte tomorrow. of all the mundane realities that still anchored me to my old life. But looking at Dante, this dangerous, complicated man who had somehow seen value in me when I believed myself invisible, I made my choice. With you, I replied simply. I want to go with you. His smile in response was like watching a sunrise, a gradual warming that transformed his entire face and reached his eyes with a promise of something I never expected to find in his dangerous world. Hope. Then with me you shall be, he said, lifting my hand to his lips. For as long as you choose. And in that moment, despite all the warnings and complications and the vastly different worlds we came from, I knew I had found something rare and precious. A man who valued my strength as much as my vulnerability, who offered protection without demanding submission, who had somehow found the light within his darkness. A man I could love, despite the danger, perhaps even because of it.